motivational speaker, Shetty. We're happy to have him. And Jay, we know people say you are Silicon Valley meets human consciousness. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us again.
Existed?
Thank you, it's great to be back.
Okay, so you've worked at global tech companies and you speak to your fans too a lot about technology. So when you look at how far technology has come in the past 5 years, where do you see it in the next 5 years, and how do you think that is going to impact human relationships?
Definitely. So I don't know how many of you do it, but we're on technology all the time. It's probably the first thing you look at when you wake up, the last thing before you go to bed. It probably even interrupts all our conversations. It changes the way we talk to each other. So it's going to infiltrate every part of our lives. But the part that I'm most fascinated about is what's going to impact our lives sooner. So we talk a lot about AI, we talk a lot about machine learning, driverless cars, virtual reality. But I'm interested in how machine learning, AI, those ones are really kicking in the next few years.
And then how do you see technology impacting the relationship between different generations?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating one. So one of the interesting things we see is that leaders or generations, we all have this way of writing off the next generation. We all have a way of, oh, in the good old days, or when I was in charge, or when we used to do that. And I started doing a bit of research into this, and I saw this fantastic group of covers on Time magazine. And every decade, there's a different Time magazine cover that almost condemns the next generation. Either the next generation's gonna fail, the next generation's the selfie generation. And I started looking a bit into it, and there's a word for that. It's called juvenoia, where we almost feel paranoid or anxiety as soon as there's a new technology or a new habit that we don't understand. So what I think we need at this point is for leaders to really say, actually, we're gonna change that culture. We're now not going to write off the next generation. We're actually going to champion them. We're going to empower them, and we're going to give them autonomy and work with them to create the future together.
What do you think then happens if people decide they're overwhelmed by technology and they don't decide to embrace it?
I think that's absolutely fine. I think that for people who don't work in technology, people who need their space, I don't want anyone to have stress or burnout, but I will say one thing. If you're working in tech, and now every area is affected by tech, you could literally disappear and the market wouldn't even notice because of the speed. I'll give you an example of an organization. So Blockbuster, everyone remember Blockbuster? They could have bought this company multiple times in the 2000s, and they didn't. They could have bought it for as little as $50 million. Blockbuster today doesn't exist. This is going down as one of the most epic fails of our generation, a biggest mistake in the boardroom. The company they could have bought, Netflix, is now worth billions. Just to think that Blockbuster could have bought them, but now doesn't exist, is phenomenal. So complacency will kill you before your competition does.
What do you think leaders need to do to engage younger audiences within the tech space?
It's a really good question. I think that it's really not about beanbags and beers on a Friday. It's really not about wearing blue jeans and brown shoes to work. It's a lot more than that. And I think that people are really looking for a purpose. People are looking for meaning. They're looking to be empowered by an ideal. So Salim Ismail in his book, The Exponential Organizations, talks about every organization needing an MTP, or what he calls a massive transformational purpose. And so Google's is organizing the world's information. TED is ideas worth spreading. And I think when you see that Google has hot air balloons that are providing rural areas with the internet, you've got mini drones delivering disasters with medical advice and help, that's what people want to get into. And it's not a PR tip, it's not a marketing tip. This is us using technology to save humanity, and that's what people want to get behind.
A lot of these leaders in the tech space, right, considered by the general public very, very smart. What do you think, though, still is their biggest challenge for these tech leaders within their space?
I think one of the biggest challenges, realistically, is probably ego, right? It's as simple as that. It's blunt and it's honest, but it's as simple as that, because when you have to become a student again after a long time, all of us, me included, it's quite hard. When you have to become a learner all over again after that many years out of college or business school, it's difficult. And I'll give you a personal example that sums it up for me. So when Snapchat was coming to rise, I got a call and they said, Jay, we'd love for you to be an influencer and a contributor on Snapchat. I was on the call and I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I'd love to be involved. This is incredible. And as soon as I hung up the phone on them, I called up one person and one person only. It was my sister. I called her up, and do you want to know what I asked her? I said, you need to teach me how to use Snapchat, right? She's 5 years younger than me, and she uses Snapchat in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And I think leaders need to have that humility, that vulnerability, and that openness to say, hey, can you help me out? Do you know how to use this? And if we're experimenting with that behavior, then we let go of that ego, we can actually invite help and change.
How much do you think the issue here has arisen more in recent years because It's not entirely clear what the effects of technological change are having on us as individuals and more importantly as a society. We're barreling forward with progress, but it's not entirely clear what we're barreling towards. And is that a big issue? Is that why this is an issue for tech companies? Because technology may be taking some of the soul out of humanity right now?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I have a video where I quote Albert Einstein and a conversation with Werner Heisenberg, where he said that, in the West, we've built a beautiful ship, and in it has all the comforts.
Hold on, Jay, for just 1 second. We're so happy to have you. We do have a moment of silence here on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange coming up in just a few seconds.
And it's actually quite apropos to the question about the soul and technology, so we should take a moment to recognize.
We'll hear the bell here in just about 8 seconds on the floor of the Stock Exchange, and then the entire floor will honor this moment of silence in honor of the events that happened over the weekend. Okay, again, that was a moment of silence there. You saw it on the New York Stock Exchange podium for the victims of the London attack over the weekend.
Speaking of which, I would love to sort of get the full answer from you on how do we bring consciousness into progress and technology. It strikes me that that's one of the most important issues of our day as we barrel into a future without always thinking about what the externalities of what we're building are.
No, I love that question. And I was just quoting Albert Einstein in an old conversation he had where he said that in the West, we've built a beautiful ship and in it has all the comforts. And the one thing that it doesn't have is a compass, and therefore it doesn't know where it's going. And I think that's very much in line to what you're saying. We're going nowhere fast. We've got all this progress, but we don't know where it's leading us. And so the question for me to leaders is, we've got to go back to intention. We've got to go back to saying, how do we consciously want technology to aid us, save us, change our lives, but not almost lead us down the wrong path, not almost go down this rabbit hole and get lost and then go, oh my God, where did it all go wrong? So we almost need to take that step back. And there's a great quote from Martin Luther King where he says that if you want a new idea, read an old book. And we find that a lot of this wisdom is actually there in the past, in how we used to consciously, intentionally build for a purpose rather than let something build us.
And are there certain characteristics that these leaders need to have to think about these things in this day and age, perhaps the unintended consequences of technology and how to run their own businesses?
Yeah, I think openness and community thinking is so needed today. So what I mean by that is, when there's a new idea, I want to know what Silicon Valley and Mark Zuckerberg thinks as much as I want to know what the Dalai Lama thinks across the world. And you may say, well, what does the Dalai Lama know about technology? He knows about humanity. And this is a technology and humanity issue where consciousness and technology collide. So I think we need to have this community thinking where we're bringing on influences from different backgrounds to have this conversation. The other thing I think is huge is thinking like a child. I was speaking to Paul Lindley the other day, and he's written this great book called Little Wins, which is all about the huge potential in thinking like a toddler. And I think learning to look at things through fresh eyes. When we were children, before all these lenses, before this discrimination, we were able to just approach things with that soulfulness that you're talking about. You know, we were wired for generosity as kids. Let's start there again.
So how do you get your message across? Is it about reaching out to leaders of organizations? Is it about reaching out to the broader set of members of the technology community? How do you think about getting your message across in a way that's going to be most effective?
Yeah, for me it's 3 ways. One of the ways is that I'm working and talking to leaders, leading organizations all the time. We're having these conversations exactly, and not being tied to an organization myself means I can be really honest with them. Sometimes we'll sit down and they'll say to me, Jay, if we did this, you realize 75% of our workforce will quit. And I'll be like, well, if they'd quit, then it's probably a good sign. And I'm able to have those really honest and genuine conversations. Then through video and online, digital media has made these messages so scalable through video to everyone in the world so that everyone can connect and become change makers in their own right. A good example is the Love Army. A few months ago, Jerome Jarre, Ben Stiller, a couple of us influencers online created a way of getting food to the famine that was happening in Somalia. We did that through activating change makers through all the people that follow us online. So these people aren't followers, they're change makers. People out there want to do something positive. Let's engage them and activate them.
Very true. Jay Shetty, a former monk and motivational speaker, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.